My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. For new listeners, I can't stress enough, it looks at the money behind the beautiful game. There's no mention of football itself or VAR or an upcoming long season, just the money behind the beautiful game. And Kieran, it's so lovely to talk to you after how was your holiday?
It was absolutely wonderful. We went to the island of Santorini, which is where we were married 11 years ago. So we celebrated our wedding anniversary there. And what I hadn't told the Baroness was that I'd booked a honeymoon suite for our wedding day anniversary. So I'm back in the good books, which means if anybody who's listening from TalkSport, you can book me at 5 o'clock in the morning for the next few weeks at least.
The same honeymoon suite that you spent time in when you were married?
Yes.
Isn't that lovely? How romantic. And it's nice that we can say Santorini now, because producer Guy, God love him, was nervous about telling people where you were, just in case. I think the whole of the Aegean made a beeline for you, Kieran, to ask you football-related questions. I just think it's lovely. It's a lovely romantic thing to do. But I just know some of the waiters who were there 11 years ago will have lost a couple of spread bets. They go, 11. There's no way that bloke with a spreadsheet will still be married to her in 11 years' time. But no, here they come. They're happy. They're in the honeymoon suite.
Yes.
It's lovely. It was a well-earned rest, Kieran, although you tweeted too much. Visions of you sneaking off out of the honeymoon suite, lifting up a pineapple where you'd hidden your phone inside like James Bond. It's lovely to be back, though. There was the usual response to our annual interview with Neil Doncaster, head of Scottish football. Clearly, the expression "you can't please all of the people all of the time" is aimed at Neil Doncaster in Scottish football. But otherwise, I think our pods went down well enough, Kieran. But it's a pleasure to be back with you, as always, to see your lovely, healthy, suntanned face. It's questions day. If you don't mind, Kieran, I'm going to indulge you with a question of my own, which hashtag asking for 26,000 friends and a lot of people... and a lot of people in the blue half of Everton. And it is a genuine football finance question, because on Wednesday we had the news that John Textor, owner of 40% of Crystal Palace and potential owner of Everton, he revealed that Harris and Blitzer, two of our other owners, Americans, had offered him, we think, £100 million to buy his share of Crystal Palace. Then the next day came the news from Textor himself that he had tried to buy out Harris Blitzer. I don't know whether he thought he was using the 100 million quid they offered him the day before, that he wanted to buy the club outright. And then the next day he issued a very lengthy press statement to say he'd been treated disrespectfully and there'd been no further progress on either them buying him or him buying them, and that therefore his whole focus now is on buying Everton, which of course he can't do until somebody buys his 40%. So just on behalf of Palace fans, Kieran, and more importantly for Everton fans, because he was the only deal on the table the last time we spoke, do we know what's happening with John Textor's 40% share of Crystal Palace?
No, I mean, it's certainly open to offers from various people I know in the world of finance. You know, I have a constant list of clubs which are, you might call red, amber or green. Yeah. In terms of the potential sale, and Palace are go, to put it mildly. It comes ultimately down to price. We have seen an acceleration in values of Premier League football clubs in particular, following the Chelsea deal, following the success of Welcome to Wrexham and so on. So I think this is the crux of the matter. Even if John Textor sold his shares, there could be an issue with regards to who actually controls the club on a day-to-day basis, with that person being Steve Parish. And I think a lot of the focus we have seen is on the percentage of shares which are owned, but not on the paperwork which goes side by side with that. And I think a classic example is what we've seen in the case of Manchester United, where Offshore Jim owns 27% of the shares, but he has effective day-to-day control of the running, initially, of the football side of the business. But given the position they've taken with regards to the redundancies and so on, it would appear that the whole of the business is now under the control of Ineos, subject to the Glazers signing off on that. So Steve Parish is the chair. I think it's fair to say that even as a Brighton fan, I think he's done a really good job. He thinks he's done a fantastic job, and he's reluctant to give up power, even though he would be willing to sell his shares. So if you are coming in to buy Crystal Palace and you're paying a lot of money, now, for me, 40% for 100 million values the club at 250 million. 2 years ago, I would have said that that's a fair price. Today, I think it's looking low in my view, because if you look at the prices that have been paid, 10% of Liverpool went for 300 million. Manchester United deal valued the club at around about 5. Chelsea went for 2.5 billion. We had people on from Ipswich saying, they got 100 million when the club was for a significant proportion when the club was in the Championship. So the Palace valuation would therefore appear to have increased. If Textor wants to buy or sell, he's got to acknowledge that. And certainly if he's selling, he's not going to sell too cheap. If he's buying, then Harris and Blitzer will be looking for more money than they initially input into the club. And that could prove to be a sticking point. There have been, I think, a few raised eyebrows at the way that Textor has gone about things. He's not necessarily behaved particularly professionally with some of his outbursts, certainly over the course of the last 12 months. And I think it is beneficial to have an element of stability at a club. Now, I think Palace could cope with that a bit more than Everton. Everton fans just want to go and have a boring 12th with no points deductions, sign a few players, and move into the new stadium. He worries me, Textor, in that regards. That is he one of these people who is perhaps asset rich and cash poor? Because we've seen with regards to his French team that the whole of that now appears to be put up for sale. And these knee-jerk decisions are not good for the long-term development of a club, be that Palace or Everton, because the clubs that have a long-term strategy, and over the course of my holiday, I did read an absolutely brilliant book by a guy called Dr. Ian Graham called How to Win the Premier League. And he was Liverpool's head of research. And it was really fascinating, in-depth. It was nerdy in places, but he was also spoken from the perspective, he happens to be a Liverpool fan as well. And it was quite clear that Liverpool's view was that in order to be competitive with clubs with more wealth than them, they had to be smarter. And that means that they needed a long-term strategy. And if you've got people like Textor in the game who are flying off the handle a bit, even if he does acquire Everton, you need a long-term plan, and the owner ultimately has to be part of that. So there are reservations. There was also an article published in Brazil with relation to Mr. Textor. Now, precise translation you don't get on Google Translate, but some of the stuff was quite inflammatory. And he wouldn't be my first choice of owner if I was a supporter of either club. It would be more like Leeds United under Cellino, which from an outside observer's point of view it's great copy, but from a day-to-day running of the club perspective, it tends to be a bit erratic and volatile. And Everton in particular don't need volatility at present.
I'm just writing down the words long-term strategy, ? I might tweet those to Steve Parish. Were you reading that book in the honeymoon suite, Kieran, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah. Where does it leave Everton? Because at the end of this incredibly long statement he made to Palace fans, where he talked about the success of every club that he owns, other than Palace, he then went on to say that his focus was entirely on Everton, and now he loved Everton and Everton fans. So he was clearly implying that he was going to be the next owner of Everton, Kieran. But Everton need something to happen, don't they, really? I mean, their squad is paper thin. They've got no money to bring players in. They need someone to come in and take charge, don't they? Whether it's him or not. But are there any other players in this story?
There are interested parties. Yes, I can absolutely guarantee that. I think part of the problem is related to Farhad Moshiri in two ways. First of all, he's looking for a cash payoff with regards to his investment. And he has put a huge amount of money into the club. I don't think he's as wealthy as he used to be. I think some of his business connections are no longer business connections, shall we say, and that's hit him. So he wants a payoff, given that Everton effectively are in debt to the tune of around about £600 million at present from the three main lenders, which are Wrexham Media Funding, the Friedkin Group, who did have exclusivity, and also 777. So you've got two people who were in sort of prime position to acquire the club, who for a variety of reasons are no longer there. So you've got £600 million worth of debt. You've still got the money to finish off the stadium. You've got Moshiri looking for a payoff. And I think we are talking tens of millions rather than hundreds, I can assure you of that. But it's still, some people, a buyer might say, I just don't really fancy it under those circumstances. You've got the overhang from 777 in terms of potential litigation there, which could be costly for a new owner. There is at least one interested party who has taken the view, let's let the whole thing unravel and let the worst case scenario occur. And worst case scenario is the club goes into administration, gets an automatic points deduction, and then they would pick up the club from the administrator with none of the 777 debts. The administrator would have to deal with that. Yes, you'd have to go and pay a substantial price to buy Everton, but you don't get any of the associated complications. Everton have got enough money to pay the bills this month, next month, probably October. Once we get beyond October, you do start to get more concerned, because Goodison has, from a romantic point of view, it's a fantastic stadium to attend, but it generates less than £1 million a match in ticket sales. And you've got a wage bill of 12, 13, 14 million pounds a month. So you've had to have 777 last season effectively bailing the club out on a month-by-month basis. Then that was transferred to Friedkin to a certain extent. Who's going to be that person this year? Those are my concerns. So getting somebody in, and Textor could easily prove to be the saviour, but his history is one where he seems to like to court controversy, and some people thrive on that. I'm not necessarily sure that's in Everton's best interests. I think the fans, as much as anybody else, they deserve a bit of peace and tranquility.
Well, it strikes me, though, Kieran, that Textor would be in the better interest of Everton fans than owners that are waiting for them to go into administration and then we'll pick them up then. I mean, because that seems a cynical and risky strategy. Is that a common approach?
It's not common, because new owners, you would still have to have an exit route from administration. So paying off 25% of unsecured creditors, that will be part of the price you pay in. You've then got the costs of running the administration. We saw in the case of Derby, it was far more. It was £2 million for the administrators and God knows how much for the lawyers and so on. So you've got money leaking out of the system. You've got an automatic points deduction, and Everton would have finished 10th or 11th last season had they not had the points deduction. So some people might say, well, they've managed it before, they can manage it again. But it's high risk. You don't want to put the club into that scenario of having the handbrake on in terms of points. And I think it's fair to say that the Premier League this season is looking a little bit stronger overall than it was last season. Then that's not going to help the club as well, because it's had another summer of having to scrape around in a market which you would rather not be in.
Well, talking of the market, Kieran, indulge me in one more observation, if you will, because I missed you, Kieran, so I'm just enjoying talking to you. Me sitting at home on the sofa speculating, thinking, I wonder where Kieran is now. I wonder if he's hang gliding or is he in a little pedalo off the beach, sipping a non-alcoholic cocktail. And of course the answer is that you were in the darkened honeymoon suite reading a databased football book. It was very disappointing as a Palace fan. Joachim Andersen yesterday saying that he was forced to go to Fulham, forced to take a £30,000 a week pay rise. But he said he was forced out of Crystal Palace a quote, cold and cynical way to exploit the remaining value of his contract. And it seems to me, Kieran, and to others, that there hasn't been much transfer activity so far in this window. But what there has been, it's been less about players spotting gaps in the squad and buying players, teams spotting gaps in the squad and buying players to cover it, and more about teams desperately getting players off the books while they've still got 2 years left of their contract. It seems to be the prevailing reason for most of the transfers we're reading about is that clubs can't afford to wait another year to get rid of a valuable asset.
Yeah, you certainly have got wasting values as you enter the last 12 months of a contract. We have also seen a greater focus on the acquisition of younger players. So him going to Fulham, he's 28?
Yep.
So if he left it another year, it becomes 29. It's 29-year-old player with 1 year left on a contract. You're not going to get 30 million for them. So as far as other clubs are concerned, I guess the main focus clearly is in respect of Chelsea, creating an environment where you've got a lot of experienced players who you talk to them, and all of there's all this talk about how they earn so much money. They're also professional athletes, and they want to ply their trade. They want to play football. They want to play in front of an audience. They know that there is a limited opportunity for them to do that. So being made to train with the academy, or being told that unless you agree to this deal, we're going to make things awkward for you, is a disappointing way to treat staff, to treat employees, to treat people who have provided so much enjoyment for fans and the owners, and have helped the owners to generate money as well. It's the commoditization of young men and women. As the women's game picks up, we can certainly expect to see this replicated. And you've only got to look at some of the non-transfer issues in the women's game to realise that it's starting to become a bit more cynical as well.
Chelsea's new manager, fantastic performance, so that was the way it was. He still hasn't quite grasped the P&S regulations, because he's still talking about the Premier League forcing him to sell players this week, and it's going to be a tense time. Is he forced to sell by the Premier League? But let's get into our questions, Kieran. So we've got some cracking questions. And the first one comes from Tony Giles. And Tony Giles says, while sitting in Gatwick Airport, waiting to fly to Cyprus on holiday, we saw 2 Korean fans wearing Tottenham shirts with Son on the back. And we saw a football finance expert hiding a laptop under some porn mags. Oh no, I made that bit up. Whilst not disputing the Korean fans' undying love and support for Spurs, it got me thinking that there's a good chance they may not have supported Tottenham all their lives until Son joined the club. Spurs obviously enjoy the monetary fruits of this, but can a price be put on the value of Son for merchandise purposes and other players in teams with a similar profile in their home country? Before you answer this question, it's a great one. Experience suggests, though, that for every South Korean fan, there are 10 Irish fans and 20 Scandinavian fans. If you go to the equivalent of Stansted Airport in Oslo, there are Norwegian fans travelling to every English game in the country, not just in the Premier League. So there's this thing everyone uses the example of South Korean fans at Tottenham, but I would suggest there are bigger fan bases in Europe crisscrossing the country and bringing in massive amounts of money, I would guess.
Yeah, I mean, the Premier League is a fantastic export, not only in terms of the broadcasting deals, not only in terms of the sponsorship deals, but every person from overseas who comes to England to watch football is adding to our exports, because it's overseas money being spent in the United Kingdom, and that is the definition of an export. So it does make a very substantial impact. As far as Spurs are concerned, I would absolutely agree with Tony's assessment that these are Son fans rather than Spurs fans. And I went to the match at the Amex on Saturday. We've got Matoma Mania still, and the number of 22 shirts being worn by Japanese fans who came to the match was crazy. But if Matoma leaves, if Son leaves, then the fans go with them. So I think this is a relatively new phenomenon as far as football is concerned, where the player is the icon rather than the football club for a new type of football fan. There will still be the dedicated fans from Scandinavia, from Ireland, from other places of Europe, Africa, Asia, and so on, who are dedicated Manchester United, Liverpool, Chelsea fans and so on. But there is a proportion of new fans who see their hero as being Son or whoever it's going to be, and they will follow that player's career, and their allegiances will move along with that. Trying to put a definitive value onto this is nigh on impossible, but I can give you some figures. So I went back into Spurs accounts before Son signed. The year before he signed, Spurs' commercial income was £60 million a year. Now, commercial income is sponsorship, it's overseas tour income, it's merchandise sales, and so on. And that's gone from 60 to 228. So that's nearly quadrupled. Now, part of that will be the move to the new stadium. There's no denying that. But part of that will be driven by the fact that Korean fans can now get to see Son play, because they couldn't do that at White Hart Lane. Capacity was 36,000, getting access to tickets. It's also interesting to note that as far as Spurs season tickets are concerned, they've got 42,500 regular season tickets. They've got 8,000 what they refer to as premium tickets. And then they've probably got 9,000 match tickets available on a day-to-day basis. Well, many of those will end up in packages which are then sold to fans of Son. And he is a brilliant player. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And anecdotally, as somebody that stood both on the terraces and I've somehow ended up in hospitality at Spurs on a couple of occasions, it is very noticeable, the number of Son fans there. And you've only, again, anecdotally, got to look at the traffic coming into and then leaving the megastore. You've got your clear plastic bags for security reasons, and the fans are coming out. There's a huge proportion of day fans who are from South Korea, and they've got every piece of merchandise they could potentially get their hands on. So this is fantastic for Spurs. That's also reflected in the prices that Spurs charge for individual match day tickets. They've managed to increase that because demand far exceeds supply, and therefore they've filled their boots, and they'll be going through the £100 million barrier in terms of annual ticket sales with consummate ease.
And I presume, Kieran, Spurs will have merchandise outlets across South Korea as well.
Yes, so they always organise an annual tour, which has matches in Korea. In terms of how much they get, it will be, if they're playing a couple of matches, they'll be getting probably around about £4 million a match, because you simply go to a promoter and say, well, we want £4 million, we want £5 million. If the promoter says it's too much, you go to the next promoter and they will pay up, because Son is box office. He is an absolute A-lister. So, there are those huge benefits as well.
It's symbiotic as well, that pre-season tour, because you have to go through sponsors' websites to get tickets, which means they collect data on you, so they're happy as well. So it's an interesting one.
Want a website with unmatched power, speed, and control? Try Bluehost Cloud, the new web hosting plan from Bluehost, built for WordPress creators by WordPress experts. With 100% uptime, incredible load times, and 24/7 WordPress priority support, your site will be lightning fast with global reach. And with Bluehost Cloud, your sites can handle surges in traffic no matter how big. Plus, you automatically get daily backups and world-class security. Get started now at Bluehost.com.
Jonathan Pipe has our next question. And it's one of those very simple questions, Kieran, but it's one of those things that it's about a subject we all think we know about. And it turns out we probably don't, the average fan, that is. Of course you do. Jonathan Pipe says, my question is about loan deals. And to be honest, it's many questions all wrapped together. That's all right. Jonathan's crafty. But it's a way of getting 4 questions answered at the same time. When a club signs a player on loan, how does this actually work? Does it mean the player is being employed by the loan club for that period, or are they still employed by the parent club, but just training and playing for another team? Finally, when the loan club is said to be covering the player's wages, what exactly does this mean in practice? We saw while you were away, Kieran, one of those fantastic spread like wildfire / made up by bored journalist at The Athletic story that Wilfried Zaha was coming back to Palace on loan, but Palace were reluctant to cover his £200,000 a week wages, and then 2 days later said journalist in the Athletic realised he had made it up and made up a reason why it wasn't going to happen, and that was tax purposes. But clearly we've seen Raheem Sterling, it seems, being linked with a lot of clubs this week at loan, but people are reluctant to pay his possibly £300,000 a week wages. So I'm interested in the answer to this question, Kieran.
Yeah, well, we are recording this show on Bank Holiday Monday morning.
No bank holidays for us, Kieran.
Absolutely. And there's another part of the football industry for whom there's no such thing as a bank holiday, and that is the football agent. So I quietly messaged one of our secret agents this morning at 7 o'clock in the morning and said, any chance, I'm pretty certain of this, any chance we did a quick chat? And I got a message back within 30 seconds, I'm already in the bloody office.
Oh, right, okay.
But yeah, I did have a long talk with one of our secret agents, which was really revealing. And he says, first of all, you need to split it between international deals and domestic deals. And in respect of the Wilfried Zaha issue, the complication would have arisen that in order to not pay tax in the UK, you have to be absent from the country for a whole tax year, i.e. from the 6th of April through to the 5th of April the following year. So that might have been part of the complications with regards to Zaha coming back to either Palace, and I think he was linked with Leicester as well. So there is a potential tax issue there. As far as the international deal is concerned, so here we could be looking at someone like Romelu Lukaku. He was in Roma last season. The way that it works is that the club, which is effectively the host club, pays his wages. And the only time that Roma would actually have paid him would be for bonuses, or if his wages at Roma were higher than they were at Chelsea, which clearly wasn't the case. And even so, under those circumstances, I've already mentioned tax once, and it is, from an accountant's point of view, it's our favourite three-letter word, ending in X, of course. For many of us, it's the only one as well. But what you would actually have is some form of tax planning. So if you had a player who was on 100 grand a week in England in the Premier League, who went out on loan and somebody was willing to offer him 150 grand a week, where he ends up being paid would actually be as much determined by the tax rules of the countries involved. And according to the secret agent, you can normally get away with this for 1 year, but not more than 1 year. So that's the position. And as far as Jonathan's first question was concerned, you are still employed. You have a contract of employment with the parent club at all times. So therefore, if Lukaku had gone from Chelsea to Roma, and if Roma had gone into administration and stopped paying the players, then Lukaku would have been able to say, well, yeah, I can come back now. I get 100% back from Chelsea because I've got a contract of employment I've signed a 5-year deal. So there was always that protection as far as the player is concerned. When it comes to domestic deal, I'm delighted to introduce our first It Depends of the new season. If we are looking at a 18 or 19-year-old player who a Premier League club is trying to get some experience for, so he's gone from the Premier League to League One, League Two, the Championship, what normally happens is that, again, he will be paid by the parent club, but the recipient club, the club in League One, wherever it's going to be, they will pay a monthly fee back to the parent. Probably, if it's League Two, perhaps it'll be 30% of wages. If it's League One, 50%. In the Championship, it might be 60 or 70%, and so on. So the parent club recoups some of the money. The player gets experience. The club, which is on the receiving end, gets a high quality player, and it's win-win deal, and that's what you're always looking to do. Secret agent said, if you've got a 26-year-old player who's got 2 years left on the contract, the manager doesn't fancy him, he's in the Championship, and another club in the Championship fancies that player, what you'd normally say is, yes, he can come, but we want 100% of the wages covered on the basis of that. Why give we're not saying he's a bad player, he just doesn't fit in with sort of the strategy and the tactics of our manager. So on the back of that, they try to recoup the whole of the wages. But the loan market is a very complicated one. And you rightly mentioned Raheem Sterling, and I think there'll be quite a few other Chelsea players who will only go on a full deal if it's in their best interests. And when we initially discussed Chelsea, when they introduced the long-term contract issue, my view was it's a high-risk, high-reward strategy. I had no issue whatsoever, as much as I loathed Chelsea. When it's to such an extent now that when Palace play Chelsea, I want Palace to win. And I never would have said that 2 or 3 years ago. But I don't think Chelsea have done anything wrong whatsoever with regards to this strategy. But it can come back to bite them, as we have seen, is if you've got players who it doesn't work out, they've got a few years left on a contract. Why should Raheem Sterling take a pay cut just to go and make life easier for billionaire owners? So I can fully understand and sympathise with the players for saying, if you want us to leave, you've got to make sure that we are not financially disadvantaged, which could mean that Chelsea have to go and give payoffs to some of the players who they're trying to shift.
We're playing Chelsea on Saturday, Kieran, so I really wouldn't hold your breath hoping that we're going to win. Just to clarify this then, Kieran, talking about loans within the Premier League and using Raheem Sterling as an example. If Raheem Sterling were to go on loan to West Ham, say, which experience tells us is far more likely than him going to Palace, the rumour is his wages are £300,000 a week, which seems a lot, even for a player of his quality. So Raheem Sterling goes to West Ham. Chelsea continue to pay his £300,000 a week wages, but West Ham would be paying some kind of loan fee towards that.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And West Ham would also be paying his bonuses, appearance bonuses, goal bonuses, and so on.
It just strikes me as well, Kieran, that we have a range of secret people across the country. We've got a range of informers, not just across this country, in Scotland and in Europe as well. They've had a nice quiet 2 weeks as well.
Yes.
All the partners of our grasses must be going, the phone's not. This is great. Still awake, still asleep at 6:30 in the morning because Maguire's not phoning up for information. Our next question comes from Chris. Now, Chris hasn't supplied a second name, and I think Chris should have supplied a second name, Kieran, because Chris says, I have a fun question for you this week. And that you is not the plural you in this. I have a fun question for Kieran this week. And Chris, is such a fun question for Kieran. Really, you should have put your second name, your phone number, your email address. You'd have got a visit from Kieran, flowers, maybe a bottle of champagne, who knows. This is the fun question. The 2021 World Ultra Wealth Report defines an ultra-high net worth individual as a person with over $30 million USD net worth. As of 2021, there are apparently 295,450 of these individuals. My question is simple. How many of these do you think are footballers or ex-footballers? Perhaps to make the question a little easier for our overworked number bod, that's you.
Thanks for that.
8,765 is a number based in the UK. Surely some of these are current or former Premier League footballers. I'm just going to make a cup of tea, Kieran. USD, what does USD mean?
US dollars.
Oh, US dollars, of course. Oh, I'm sorry, I was confused there because he put the little logo, the sign for dollars and USD. Got you. Okay. Good question, Kieran. No, fun. I will dispute, but clearly, judging by the laughter and the smile on your face, this is where you'll be finding some friends in a pub just to tell them one.
Yes, I will. Yes. So 30 million US dollars is the equivalent of 23 million pounds. Now, as far as footballers are concerned, the average annual salary for a Premier League footballer is around about £3 million, of which, let's be honest, 40%, 45% of that's going to go in tax. You're going to be spending some of it, probably spending no more than 10 to 15% of it in a year. And people say, well, that doesn't sound very much. Spending £500,000 a year is still spending a lot of money. So therefore, on a £3 million salary, a player is likely to be potentially saving £1.2 million a year. So for a player for Palace or Brighton, I don't think there will be many who would hit that threshold over their career. The average Premier League career is 7 years. So I did my sums with regards to that. There will be some players at Palace. You know the Palace wage system, how that works, and it has been sort of a two-tier system with regards to some players paid substantially more than others. Brighton, Burnley, Brentford, clubs like those, they tend to have a much narrower wage band. So I don't think any of their players being close. When we then move our attention to the top of the Premier League, looking at the 2023 accounts, the average salary for a Manchester City player, and this is the first time, because we normally talk about players being paid a weekly amount, but I think for this particular metric, it's best to look at an annual. The average salary for a Manchester City player in 22-23 was £10.2 million. Again, if they lose half of that for tax and other ancillary reasons, that's £5 million. If they got a 4 or 5 year contract, you can see practically everybody who stays at Manchester City for a long period of time would therefore come within the remit of being an ultra high net worth individual. Certainly Pep would be there. The same for Liverpool. Liverpool average salary was 9.1 million. Chelsea was 9.8. So you can see at the top level of the Premier League, you could easily have not just the owners, but management and probably a dozen players sort of potentially reaching that threshold, provided they stay at the club for a long period of time. So you think about Mo Salah at Liverpool, Virgil van Dijk, all of these players are likely to go through that particular metric, and rightly so, because they are A-listers. They are at the top of their industry, just as people in the entertainment industry who are A-listers, they would be deemed to be ultra high net worth as well. So how many are we talking about? I think we're probably talking several hundred rather than thousands, but it's still potentially going to be 200 or 300 could be over the course of their career hitting that level of being deemed to be ultra high net worth.
See, you've started me off now, Kieran. I'm just pondering how many people in my business would be ultra high net worth individuals, and then of course being a performer, pondering how many of them actually deserve to be bloody ultra high net worth. But Craig Brewer has our next question, and it's an interesting one. We've got a question coming up later on about transfer windows, and Craig's question is just as interesting for those of us paranoid about this time of year and losing our best players. Craig says, I was wondering if release clauses are publicly available to clubs. There always seems to be a level of ambiguity to them, and some clubs almost seem to guess when they're trying to trigger them. Is there some sort of list of players with such clauses? Now, my main interest in this, Kieran, is that, again, I have to use a Palace example. At 5 o'clock on the 16th of August, Palace social media and WhatsApp groups went mad because apparently 30,000 people in and around South East London knew that Eze's release clause ended at 5 o'clock on that particular day. I don't know how they knew it, and it hasn't been confirmed, but it seems to have been public knowledge somehow. So I'm really interested in the answer to Craig's question.
Well, Craig, loose lips sink ships. And ultimately, the release clause is a private contract between the employee, who is the football player, and the employer, who is the football club. There are other parties to that who get to see the contract. And again, to use sort of a local example, Brighton had tried to sign Rutter, Georgina Rutter, from Leeds United, put in bids of 29 and 35 million. He had last week a release clause which expired at midnight for £40 million. And lo and behold, at 11:30 p.m, 30 minutes before the clause was due to expire, Brighton put in a bid of £40 million. Could be just pure coincidence, or perhaps not. So these are private-ish relationships. Sometimes it is in the interests of the parties. So, what's to stop the player from speaking to a player at another club to say, I quite like joining you. I've got a £40 million release clause. If the player wants to push on this, then there is ways of getting it. They don't have to do it directly. They can do it indirectly through the representatives. But in theory, it's a private contract, just as my salary at the university is a private contract. If I choose to publicise it, I choose to publicise it. But we've always, and I think it's always been a very British thing, that we are very coy with regards to the nature of earnings and contracts and so on, because nobody likes to come as, Billy Two Potatoes, do they, in terms of coming across as conceited and braggish. So yes, they are private, they're not publicly available, but they still manage to find their way into the public domain through surreptitious leaking.
I love the idea, Kieran, that you're so British, you went for Billy Two Potatoes. Not loads of potatoes, just two potatoes. Again, release clauses, Kieran, it depends whether you support the buying club or the selling club, but they are the bane of so many fans' life and a boon to so many speculators on Sky and Talk Sport. You kind of think, what's the point of having them if you're not going to publicise? Although, because some clubs clearly are desperate to offload the player and will tell everybody they've got release clause, and some clubs are desperate not to reveal there's a release clause in case they're triggered. And the other question as well, Kieran, I think we have talked about this before, but of clarifying, if, so Brighton come in by coincidence a half an hour before his release clause at Leeds is expired, do Leeds, they're legally obliged, once you trigger that release clause, does he then have to go to Brighton?
No, he's entitled to have a conversation.
Right.
It could be that he says, I think I'm better than Brighton, I want to play for a club which is higher up the ladder, and could easily decline that position. So the release clauses are there to protect all of the parties to a certain extent. And also, we always forget the player wants to play at the highest level. So if a player joins a Premier League club, and let's be honest, if they joins a Premier League club like Brighton or Palace or Leeds or Brentford, whoever it was going to be, and they want to continue playing in the Premier League, and that clubs get relegated, the player might say, well, if somebody comes in with a £35 million offer and a chance to play in the Premier League, I want to take that up. And they might not have joined that club initially because they didn't have the release clause. So it's all part of the overall negotiations. We think about when we were talking to Maheta from the PFA, he was very much on the side of players, as you'd expect him to be, but he did sort of emphasise that we want to play at the highest level, and sometimes clubs can be really awkward. That's the whole reason behind Bosman in the first place, was due to the intransigence of the club that John Mark Bosman was playing for, in terms of not being willing to match his former salary. And this legal case that we discussed with Maheta, which could result in the dismantling of the transfer system as we know it, has been caused by clubs playing hardball with their employees.
I really enjoyed that interview with Maheta, really enjoyed it, but I knew that answer about the National League would cause ripples, shall we say, on social media, just as it did. I think it's important. The reason I asked you to clarify that about release clauses not being compulsory is that so many fans think they are. So many fans assume that if another triggers a release clause, that player is gone. And I think it's important to underline the fact that that's not the case.
But I think there's a famous case when Luis Suarez had a £40 million release clause, and Arsenal famously offered £40,001,001, and Liverpool just turned around and said, "Yeah, no, you're not talking." Now you have to look at the small print. So the player doesn't have to go. The player could be for family reasons, could be that the player is actually settled at the club. But normally, when you make an offer, if the player does not have a release clause, the selling club, for want of a better phrase, can continually say no until ultimately somebody offers money, which is so crazy that the chairman, the chief executive, and the coach say, well, we could buy 3 players with that, and they decide to go ahead with it.
Talking of information being in the public domain or not, David Swain has this question, and it relates to club budgets. And David Swain says, we often hear managers stating that we have one of the lowest budgets in the division, or criticising other clubs, saying they have one of the top 5 budgets in the division. I'm thinking of Andy Holt for some reason when I read those words out. How do we know what budgets are in place? Is this data available somewhere? Or do we just make a working assumption based on a club's average attendance? It does seem to be a useful indicator for clubs to check if they are under or overperforming.
I'll answer that second question first. I'm a little bit cautious with regards to average attendances as a barometer. And the reason why I say that is if you take a look at the Premier League, we do have some clubs for whom attendances represent no more than 3% of their total revenues. So it's not necessarily great. If you take a look at Manchester City, for example, their matchday revenues from average attendances are half of those of Manchester United and Spurs, and yet Manchester City have got a competitive budget. The budgets aren't in the public domain, and cards on the table. I do teach for the League Managers Association, so I explain how the budgets work and so on. And in terms of the budget for an individual manager, if they have that conversation with the chief executive and the finance director, effectively what you have to do is you say, well, this is our current wage bill, this is our current amortization cost, and you put those two together. And the reason why you do that, we've discussed Bosman, is that if I'm signing a player on a Bosman, it means I'm not having to go and pay £10 million on a transfer fee, and I'm not having to amortise that over 5 years, so that's costing me £2 million a year. So that's why we saw with Mbappe that he waited for his contract to expire, because it meant that he would get more money from Real Madrid than if he necessarily left during his period of employment. So you add all of the elements together, so that would be the wage cost, the amortisation cost. Against that, the manager might realise that, well, I'm pretty close to my budget, and therefore the managers might say, there's a couple of players who I was quite happy to be in the squad, but I really want player X from this other club, so I'm going now to try to shift those players out. So it is a game of chess. It is part of a trading environment, but you don't actually see the physical level of the budget as a whole, and what will be in one club's budget, what's included might not necessarily be in another club's budget. So I would always ask, and one of the things I always advise a manager is find out what exactly your employer is talking about in respect of budget, and then they're in position to start working and negotiating on the basis of that.
Well, see, that's the thing. I mean, David's question is specifically about club budgets. But if you ask 99% of fans, they will simply put the word transfer in front of the word budget, because that's all they're concerned about. They're not concerned about the ratio of spending on catering to branding, for example. They're just concerned about how much money they have left to pay for players and to pay for their wages.
And you've got to take a holistic approach. There tends to be two budgets within clubs, and certainly when I've looked at the accounts of some clubs, they are very, very specific. They actually say football costs for the year are so many million. I think Palace do a metric with sort of players' wages as a proportion of revenue. I think Rangers do something similar. I know that Brighton have got this heading of football costs. But what goes into it, of course, it's just like everybody's favourite bolognese sauce. It's always slightly different ingredients.
Well, see, Ed will say it's time, Kieran. Time, not Thyme. Are there some managers then, Kieran? I mean, you have far more experience of dealing with managers across the entire league than I do. Are there some managers that are genuinely interested in the holistic, as you say, so the entire budget of the club, or are most of them simply concerned, like fans are, with how much they've got available to spend?
The managers are concerned with their sandpit. And the reason why this, you've only got to look at the average period of employment of a manager in the lower divisions. It's sort of 12 to 18 months. And you simply don't have enough time to get to grips with the whole element of the club, because the nature of being a football manager is that if you lose 4 or 5 matches, you've got the fans baying for you to get the sack. So therefore your focus purely is on that football budget, which you will have agreed, or we haven't agreed, it will have been probably imposed on you by the upper echelons of the club.
David Litterick has our next question, Kieran. David was wondering how much it costs to actually send a team to an international tournament. While they take 26 players to a World Cup, there has to be at least as many supporting staff, if not more. Do we know how much it costs? We know there are issues in the Women's World Cup, I think. I mean, Jamaica struggled to find the money to send a full squad over, but it seems less and less that you hear this discussion, but it's a good question.
It is, and it does very much vary from football association to football association, and there's a huge gap in wealth. Fair play to FIFA that they have increased sort of the base fee, which is now going to the football associations. If we go back to 2002 and Roy Keane and Mick McCarthy, Well, that was originally driven by the fact that the suits at the FAI, they were flying business class and the players were flying in economy for budgetary reasons. And then sort of the quality of the hotels was below the level of expectation, I think, of some of the senior players in the Irish squad. Whereas if you take a look at the English FA, they do their homework well in advance. They get the best hotels, but that doesn't apply to every football association. Now, the English FA can afford to do that because it makes a lot of money from matches at Wembley, regardless of the opposition. England will get 80,000. And the FA has got the FA Cup and other income sources as well. Whereas if you're looking at the Jamaican Football Association and others in different regions, they are operating on a far, far lower budget because they don't have the TV money, they don't get big attendances for home games a lot of the time, and therefore they've got to use the money from FIFA very, very carefully. So you can't put a definitive cost on it, because it varies so much from the big clubs, England, Germany, Argentina, Brazil, France and so on, and some of the other clubs. But we are talking substantial amounts, because if you're away for 28 days and you've got 50 people in a five-star hotel, plus you've got the transport costs, plus you've got all of the ancillary costs as well, the money that you get from FIFA very, very quickly disappears.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, if you look in the recent Euros, where England are staying, where France is staying, these are not hotels, are they? They're estates. I mean, they're vast tracts of land, which is great because it means the players can play a bit of golf and it gives them a bit more security. So the days of the England team staying in a backstreet hotel in the middle of town are long gone, aren't they?
They are. And players' transport is an interesting issue, because we're recording this on Monday, and we've seen on social media in the last 24 hours Everton returning from the match at Spurs by train, and the complications that can arise from that as a result.
Nathan Hopwood Curry has our penultimate question. And Nathan Hopwood Curry's question is on the back of watching the latest season of Welcome to Wrexham. I've given up saying series now, Kieran. It seems that everybody under the age of 50 now talks about a new TV season. I'm just a lone voice in the wilderness, so I'm just going to go with it. The latest season of Welcome to Wrexham. Multiple points, the documentary focuses on specific players, such as Mendy in episode 5. Do we have an example of, or do you expect this to have any tangible effect on the player's future value to other clubs? Or has something comparable happened before, where a specific piece of media has substantially affected the value of a player?
I think in terms of transfer fee and subsequent earnings potential of a player, this would very much be the exception rather than the norm. It's more likely, if those people that have watched Welcome to Wrexham, some of the players have been quite high profile. So if we take a look at Paul Mullin, for example, who Wrexham signed in the National League, he'd gone down 2 divisions. I think he's appeared in 11 episodes of Welcome to Wrexham. Now, what his agent will have done is that on the back of that, he'll have negotiated a boot deal. He'll have negotiated some sponsorship arrangements for the player. But in terms of the player's value, I think it would be a very naive club to say, we're going to sign somebody from Wrexham because we think we're going to get a bit of reflected glory on the basis of that. But you're not. I mean, the stars of Welcome to Wrexham, it's the landlord of the local pub, but it is very much ultimately the Reynolds and McElhenney show, and it has been superbly edited and presented on that basis. The players and Phil Parkinson and Sean Harvey and others are sort of the alsos of that show. So I would be very reluctant to pay an additional fee to somebody that's just appeared on television, because once the television show stops, or once that player moves, they're not going to be on television anymore. And as we've seen in the world of politics, people have got ridiculously short memories, and they've got very short memories in broader issues in terms of life. I can assure you, football, which is, as we both know, 7 days is a very long time in the world of football, and that would apply as well.
I suppose it might have a short-term effect, Kieran, if we're talking about short memories. Someone like Mendy, it may be that for a couple of weeks after his episode, some of the American tourists that turned up have got his name on the back of their shirt. But then, as you say, the next episode, they'll buy another Wrexham shirt with a different player's name on the back. So in terms of long-term value for the actual player, and they won't be getting paid any extra money for featuring in that episode either, it doesn't really help them much, does it?
It doesn't help them directly. I mean, that they can start, that their social media presence, they're likely to get far more followers on Insta and Twitter and so on. So they might be able to monetize that should they want to go down that route. I think they would be able to sign sponsorship arrangements on a personal basis on the back of the show, but we're not talking any impact upon if they move on to other clubs, because you were at Wrexham, but now not. I don't care anymore.
Yeah. See, it can work the other way though, Kieran, can't it? As we know for certain that Madueke won't ever be getting that move to Wolves that he was after. So
yes,
you need to be careful with raising your head above the parapet publicity-wise sometimes.
Remember the Carlos Tevez "Welcome to Manchester" poster? I don't think he's doing that to welcome to Wolverhampton, is he?
Ben Mayer has our final question. It's a question, Kieran, I think will send a shudder down the spine of most football fans who don't support one of the so-called Big Six clubs here, or one of the giants of football in Europe and South America. Ben Mayer says, as clubs now feel like they're under the pump to bring in star players more than ever, and with an urge from fans for the board to get a wriggle on in doing so, what would be the financial impact, if any, if global transfer windows were to be scrapped and for players to be able to transfer at any point in a season?
I think there will be substantial legal ramifications for this, because people forget that the transfer window didn't used to exist. It was there to protect initially late transfers. So if you had a club that was going for promotion, going to win the old Division 1 or trying to avoid relegation, if you've got a team that's in mid-table, could you loan all of their players for the last 2 matches of the season because they're better than ours? So it was originally partly due to the integrity of the game, but partly also to some of the consequences of the Bosman rule. So following Bosman, where do we stand in terms of freedom, rights of freedom of movement, which exist in all other professions? So why shouldn't they exist in football? So the window was created to protect both the clubs and the players. If you're allowed to transfer at any point in a season, that would have ramifications, because what clubs are doing now, that they're trying to make sure that from the end of August till the start of January, they've got realistically 2 players for every position. Now, if you scrap the window and your left back gets injured, well, if you can sign a player at any time during the season, can you see that perhaps that would result in fewer players being employed by individual clubs, because you don't need that same degree of cover? So, this is a classic example of the law of unintended consequences. So it starts to get complicated. I don't think it will necessarily disadvantage the smaller clubs, although at least they, you were saying in respect of Eze, his clause has now effectively expired, so you've got a bit of protection from that, and you get to the 31st of August and he's still there. So at least you've got the first half of the season to say, right, well, we know we've managed to keep some of our star players, and we can work forward on that basis. You weren't able to do that before the creation of the windows. So I think smaller clubs are quite happy with the way that the window operates. TV companies are absolutely delighted with it, as I said, the rest of the media, because it gives them something to talk about over the summer. But if the global transfer windows were to be scrapped, it gets complicated as well, because not all clubs, of course, are Northern Hemisphere. All of our focus is.
Yeah.
You and I both remember the summers where our mum and dad would do the pools and just randomly crossing boxes for clubs that you've never heard of.
I remember talking to the manager of one Premier League club shop, not Palace, funny enough, it was another club. He was talking about how much he hates the January transfer window because it came so soon after Christmas. And I did point out there's not a lot you could do about January following December, because we've got many years of tradition with that happening. But he said he spent a lot of time, if a parent came in and was buying a shirt for a child in December, and he would say, "Is this a Christmas present?" And he'd say, "Yeah," and he'd say, "Don't get the name put on the back, because there's no guarantee that player will be with the club by the end of January, and you don't want to break the kid's heart." And you kind of think that's the sort of ramification that doesn't occur to you, but it's a very valid point.
It is. The one certainty we have in football is that there's a lot of uncertainty, and that applies to the player trading market as it does to the level of performance, the level of managers' tactical acumen, and so on.
Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that'd be very kind of you. It will get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes, which our next one will be Christmas already, Kieran. We can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on X, Twitter, and you can find us on YouTube, our YouTube channel. And if you'd like to buy our book, which is coming up very soon on paperback, you can find details on their website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday with our first news pod of the season, so it's going to be a busy one. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you, as always, to everybody that's kept in contact during, and also those of you that have been telling me off for being on social media when I put out the occasional tweet. And the Baroness would like to thank you particularly with regards to that. We're going back on the road, so we are going to do some live shows. I think the first one is Thursday, October the 17th. We're part of the Cheerful Earful Comedy Podcast Festival, and we are appearing in Balham. So tickets are up. If you go to Cheerful Earful, you'll be able to get tickets there. I think they're £18, £15 plus VAT. So we're looking forward to that. And Princess Julian, our tour manager, has had quite a few conversations recently. So we hope to be hither and indeed thither with regards to venues up and down the country with a few more gigs as well. But partly, it's mainly my fault why we've been a bit quiet, because the workload, and also obviously I've got commitments towards the university as well, which have to take priority.
And your family, Kieran, and your family.
And family, yes, sorry. There's various ways that you can support the show, and one of those is to give us a review on your podcast app. And according to Producer Guy, you can write whatever you want with regards to your review. So you could even say you would rather have the show presented by Joe Strummer and Nigel Farage. And that would allow you to come onto stage with Farage riots, I want a riot, Farage riots, a riot on my own. I believe Nigel Farage hates the phrase Farage riot, so please don't use the word Farage riots on social media to annoy him.
Yeah, what even annoys him even more, Kieran, is when you pronounce his name the way it should be pronounced, which is Farage, which is how the rest of his family pronounce it. While Nigel Farage would want the French-sounding pronunciation of his name, I don't know. But the thing is, Kieran, I don't know where Nigel Farage would find time in between his busy parliamentary schedule representing his constituents, which, of course, he's devoting 24 hours a day to do. Also, getting Joe Strummer is going to be quite difficult, if that.
Could be, yes.
Although,
yes.
To be fair, I think it's probably more difficult to get Farage than Joe Strummer.
Well, you're more likely to find Joe Strummer in Clacton than you are Nigel Farage. Bye.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.